As we talk about the fundamentals of blacksmithing, perhaps the most basic technique there is drawing out or making a bar longer and skinnier. Oftentimes this is done for the purpose of creating a taper like you would use in a scroll or something like that. So today, to demonstrate some drawing out techniques, I'm going to make 3 different tapers. I'm going to start with 1/2 inch square bar and center punch a mark 3 inches from the end. So I'm just going to be working with the last 3 inches. The rest of this is just something I can get a hold of with a pair of tongs. And the 3 different tapers I want to work on are a flat taper. So the bar will be reduced from 1/2 inch down to a point in 1 dimension, so only in thickness. In width it will remain a 1/2 inch. The second bar, I want to do a square taper, so it will be reduced from 1/2 inch down to a point in both thickness and in width. And the third bar will start off as a square taper, but then we'll round it up. And the purpose for this is kind of to get an idea of how much material it takes to do these different things. All of these are going to end up a completely different length than they started out. And this is a good way to kind of come up with a rule of thumb on how much that's going to stretch. So stick around to the end of the video and we'll see how much 3 inches stretches out to in a flat taper, a square taper, and a round taper. It is certainly possible to taper a bar working on the face of the anvil, and if you use the cross peen of a cross peen hammer, straight peen of a straight peen hammer, that helps push the material out lengthwise and can make your life a little bit easier. However, working over the horn of the anvil so that round surface helps push the material in one direction gives a similar result and is perhaps more convenient. Of course, you can always use both the cross peen and the horn of the anvil simultaneously. Try to clean it up and make it all even. So that's our flat taper or parallel-sided taper. The same techniques are used on the square taper, either working at the face of the anvil, using the cross peen, or working over the horn. All are fair game. Turning the bar 90 degrees every blow does help keep it square and can make things go a little bit more efficiently. When it cools down, get it back in the fire. As you work the very end of the taper, it's very easy for your hammer to overhang the end and strike the anvil. It's bad for your hammer and for your anvil. So if you work right at the edge of the anvil, it can overhang the edge. Some people like to use the edge of the anvil the same way you'd use a cross peen or the horn of the anvil. And this does work, but if your anvil is at all sharp, this will introduce little sharp areas that will turn into cold shuts and maybe a stress fracture at some point. So I personally don't like to do it that way. Now I have to forge all those little dings out of there. Remember, you want this to taper evenly. You don't want it to be concave nor convex. You want a straight line in the taper. At these low heats, I'm mostly just trying to clean it up and make it smooth. I'm not trying to change its shape very much. Yeah, we'll go ahead and call that good for the square taper. Then we're going to move on to the piece for the round taper. It starts exactly like the square taper, Finish the taper in square cross section first, then forge it octagonal, then round it. The concept of forging square, then octagon, then round is fairly consistent in blacksmithing. There's always exceptions to every rule, but unless you have a really good reason to deviate, go with square, octagon, round. You'll probably get better results in the long run. Now you can do all of this at the anvil, but I have the luxury of a power hammer. So let's take a look at what drawing out looks like under the 25-pound Little Giant power hammer. Now this Little Giant power hammer hits fast enough that I can't keep up with it trying to go 90-degree turns every other blow. So I forge out a few, lighten up on the treadle a little bit, roll it, and then get back and forge out a few blows the other direction. And of course this still needs to be cleaned up at the anvil. Now we'll knock the corners on the square taper down until it's an octagonal taper. The more of a true octagon you make this, the easier it will be to round up. A lot lighter blows near the tip of the taper there. Again, the blows at the lower heats are just smoothing it out, not so much forging it. Now, how much did our bars stretch in length as we tapered them? The flat taper or the parallel taper started at 3 inches and it is now at 6 inches. And that's exactly what I would expect for this. Essentially, you've just taken a triangle off of this, cut it halfway through, flipped it over, added it to the end of it. So doubling in length from where you started is exactly what I would expect for a flat taper. Our square taper ended up at 8.5 inches. And this is actually a little bit short of what I would think, and it's a little bit parallel in one section here, and perhaps not a perfect 4-sided square taper. As I recall, the rule of thumb should be that it stretches 4 times its original length. So this should have ended up at 12 inches, so I've done something wrong, although going back and forth to the fire does scale it, and you do lose material to scale. And if you burn it up a little bit, you're going to lose material that way, although I didn't burn any of this, but scale is a possibility for some. Mostly I think it's just a little bit too parallel through part of this and isn't actually a sharp point. So all those things combined. But this gives you an idea, if you draw this out the way you like it, how much shorter do you need to cut your material to allow for the fact that you're going to taper it in whatever project you're working on. Now the round taper is just a little bit more than that 8.5 inches. Again, I think it's probably not quite perfect. It looks good, it's kind of a blunt point, and for a lot of things you don't want a sharp point anyways. But once again, my memory says that that should be 5 times. So this should have stretched out to 15 inches if my memory is correct. And I'm going to see if I can find out where I got that information from. It seems like I've been able to do that in the past, but for some reason today it just didn't happen. The big thing is, if you need an exact length, you need exact material specifications, practice this before you start your project, and then you'll know what you're going to end up with. Whatever technique, whatever you see in your eye that you like in the taper, that's what you need to work with. Don't just work off the rule of thumb, but work off of what you like and make them consistent if you're doing multiples in a project. Now this is a great exercise if you're just learning to blacksmith, so I would make several of these, and I would keep them on hand because maybe in the next video, I'm going to cut these tapers off and we'll make some hooks or something out of them. But until then, stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.